Hey, what's up everybody? My name's Rohan, otherwise known as the Roshank Redemption. Today, I'm going to be giving you all 10 helpful tips for a successful playthrough in Fallout 4. And the main reason why I'm doing this is that I'm not sure what you guys think, but personally, I find Fallout 4 to be much more difficult than any of Bethesda's previous games, and I've had a lot more trouble with it than I did in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. But I will say that if you go about things correctly, and if you prepare ahead of time with this game, then you can most definitely have a fun and successful playthrough. Also, one more thing I should mention is that these tips aren't in any particular order. I initially tried ranking them, but I realized pretty quickly that they're all pretty important, and I figured that ranking them was just probably not the best idea. But anyways, without further ado, let's move on to the list, folks. Tip number 1, plan your character ahead of time. This one might seem a little obvious at first, since most people do go into a playthrough of Fallout 4 with a sort of general idea of their character in mind, but I specifically want to emphasize here the degree to which you should plan out your character. And by this, I mean that just planning your special attributes and playstyle in itself is not enough. I recommend that you go into the game with a good idea of what quests you want to complete first, what unique weapons you want to pick up, and most importantly, the perks that you plan on taking. The reason why perks are so important in Fallout 4 is that the game is devoid of skills, making it much more difficult for you to buff your character than in previous games. So if you don't plan out your perks well, then it could result in a frustrating go of things in Fallout 4. Tip number 2, avoid radiation at all costs. Alright, now this one seems really obvious, but once again, I want to emphasize the extent to which you should avoid radiation here, because it's so easy to slip into the mindset of, oh, a little radiation is no problem and it won't really hurt me, since in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, radiation wasn't really that big a deal. I mean, yeah, you could die from radiation poison eventually in those games, but taking 10, 20, or even 100 points of radiation was never really a big problem, but in Fallout 4 things are different, because for every 10 points of radiation you take, your health is reduced by 1 point. So for instance, if you just started your playthrough and have 100 health, then taking 100 points of radiation means a 10% health reduction. And for this reason, I would go so far as to say that if you're ever taking radiation that is avoidable, then you're not playing the game correctly and should avoid even the smallest amount of radiation at all costs. Tip number 3, the importance of intelligence. I'm not going to say that intelligence is the most important special attribute, since that's definitely up for debate, but it's honestly undeniable that intelligence is very important in Fallout 4. Unfortunately, with the lack of skills, really the only way to buff up your character outside of things like bobbleheads and magazines is through perks, and the only way to get perks, of course, is through leveling. And for those of you who don't know, intelligence affects the rate at which you level up pretty significantly, meaning the higher intelligence you have, the more rapidly you can obtain perks in the long run, and for that reason, you should not neglect intelligence in any playthrough or you'll definitely regret it. Tip number 4, understand the enemy level scaling system. This one probably sounds a little bit confusing, so let me clarify here. With this tip, I'm specifically referring to the fact that the wasteland gets more and more hostile the further south that you travel. The southern parts of the Commonwealth are absolutely riddled with incredibly high level enemies, so make sure that you account for this when playing this game. More specifically, if your character is a low level, then I don't recommend venturing too far south or you'll definitely have a really tough time. Additionally, although it hasn't been officially stated by Bethesda, I find areas to the east to be pretty hostile as well, so my recommendation is that you stick to the northwestern part of the Commonwealth while your character is a low level, and then slowly branch out as you level up. Tip number 5, use different gear for different enemies. As I'm sure many of you have noticed, there are a ton of unique weapons in Fallout 4 that are specifically useful against certain types of enemies. For instance, the AX-90 Fury is a plasma gun that does 50% more damage against super mutants, and then you have the Party Starter, which does 50% more damage against humans. And the list goes on, guys. For each race in Fallout 4, there are specific weapons that do more damage against that race, and similarly, there are armors that are specifically effective against certain types of enemies, such as the Destroyer's chest piece, which reduces damage from humans by 15%. Using these items, you can mix and match to create the best sets of gear to combat specific enemies. So I guess the point here is, guys, use the unique weapons in Fallout 4 to put together sets of armor and weapons that will allow you to combat specific enemies better, and then pick and choose your gear to maximize your effectiveness against all opponents. Tip number 6, play on a high difficulty. Alright, now this one seems really counterintuitive, since playing on a lower difficulty should make things easier, right? Well, yes and no. Obviously, on the one hand, lower difficulties means easier combat, but one thing many people fail to realize about Fallout 4 is that on higher difficulties you encounter more legendary enemies. For those of you who are unfamiliar with legendary enemies, on a rudimentary level, there's special enemies that carry unique, one-of-a-kind legendary weapons as a reward for killing them. And after saying that, I'm sure many of you can see where I'm going with this. Because higher difficulties spawn more legendary enemies, this ultimately results in better gear for your characters, meaning in the long run, playing at a higher difficulty could actually help you to create a better character. And besides that, playing on a high difficulty is just a great way to challenge yourself in a game like this. So guys, my 6th tip is to turn up the difficulty as high as you can within reason. Tip number 7, take advantage of power armor. Power armor mechanics have completely changed in Fallout 4 from previous installments. At a basic level, the changes to power armor have resulted in it being incredibly useful and very overpowered in my opinion, so you definitely want to take advantage of this new mechanic. I mean, yeah, finding fusion cores and maintaining your power armor can be kind of a pain, but ultimately it's well worth it since power armor can help you to defeat enemies that you'd have no chance of defeating without it. Finally, power armor grants you a massive strength bonus, meaning if you're a fan of melee weapons, then power armor is definitely going to help you out a ton. So guys, be sure to take advantage of power armor in Fallout 4. Tip number 8, use VATS as much as possible. Alright, now this one is going to sound a little bit controversial, but just hear me out on this, guys. Now at first glance, VATS might seem to be less useful than in Fallout 3 New Vegas, since it moves in slow motion now as opposed to completely stopping the game. And this is true, VATS moving in slow motion definitely does make things a little bit harder than before. However, overall, I would actually argue that VATS has gotten a bit better, and the reason for that is because of critical hits. Let me give you guys an example here. Using the Righteous Authority, which is a weapon that doubles critical hit damage, along with the Better Criticals perk, various bobbleheads and magazines and stuff of that nature, I can get my criticals to do around 7 times normal damage. With upgrades, the Righteous Authority can do up to mid 60s, low 70s normal damage, meaning a critical strike can do around 500 damage with one shot. If you combine this with the Critical Banker perk, which allows you to save up 3 critical shots at the higher levels, then you've pretty much got 3 free kills right there. Now I realize that this last example was a little exaggerated, but the point is that criticals are incredibly helpful in Fallout 4 if you combine them with the right perks. And the thing is, you can only execute criticals and fill up your crit meter in VATS. So guys, my point is that VATS is very helpful in Fallout 4 since it allows you to execute criticals, so make sure that you don't neglect it. Tip number 9, utilize the weapons crafting system. This one's really obvious, but I'm gonna say it anyways. Do not neglect the weapon crafting system in Fallout 4. As I said before, Fallout 4 doesn't have a skill system, meaning it's much more difficult for you to buff up your characters in this game. And in fact, really the only reliable way for you to consistently increase weapon damage is through modifying your weapons. So if you're not doing that, then your character will effectively stagnate, and you're definitely going to have a really tough time in this game. So guys, make sure that you constantly take advantage of and experiment with the weapons crafting system. Tip number 10, collect the bobbleheads and magazines. Now when I say to collect the bobbleheads and magazines, I don't just mean that if you happen to find a bobblehead you should pick it up, or if you know an easy magazine location that you should go and get it. No, what I'm trying to say is that you should actively seek out bobbleheads and magazines to improve your character. And obviously this doesn't mean that you should put all your time into hunting down the bobbleheads and magazines, since there are a ton of them and doing so would be pretty ridiculous, but my point is that you should definitely put some effort into locating a good amount of them. The reason why bobbleheads and magazines are so helpful is that once again, Fallout 4 is devoid of skills, meaning there are pretty much only 3 major ways you can buff your character, through perks, weapon modding, and bobbleheads and magazines. So guys, if you ignore the bobbleheads and magazines, you're effectively ignoring a major opportunity to improve your character, which is undoubtedly going to hurt you in the long run. Alright folks, and that is pretty much going to do it for this video. As always, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more Fallout 4 content. The comment question of the day is, what do you guys think are the 10 most important things to keep in mind when playing Fallout 4? Obviously, you guys already know mine from watching this video, but I'm sure there are more than a few pointers that I missed, so let me know your thoughts on all this down in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you all have an awesome rest of the day, and I will see you in my next video.